This is William and Lonsdale, a podcast about the legal ecosystem and the fascinating people who make it tick. Today, your host Michael Green speaks with Vincent Shin. Vincent came to Australia from South Korea with his family when he was 1. How he got from there to Program Manager of the Youth Law Program at West Justice is an extraordinary journey. He grew up in a home with a volatile father, which led to extreme family violence. He struggled through school due to his trauma and he failed Year 12. The environment Vinny grew up in has shaped him and the amazing work he does today. Another huge impact on his work came from his time as a carer in residential care homes. Resi Care, as it's known, are homes for young people who have been removed from their families by Child Protection Services. Although it's the law that he now uses to support the young people in Resi Care, initially, it was his experience with boxing and kick fighting that broke the ice.
I had a background in amateur boxing and kickboxing, so I was quite lucky that I had that combat sport background, which I definitely used quite a lot as a tool to build rapport with the young people. And I'd whip out my phone and show them my fights on on YouTube. They were really interested in that, and so I really enjoyed taking the kids to the gym. And so a lot of them loved going. And once they found out that I was a boxer, they're like, Vinny, teach me boxing. So we had a boxing gym, and there were a lot of kids that really, really enjoyed it. And I remember this one group of kids at one house were just so excited about doing the boxing and like so dedicated. Like, I quit smoking, I quit everything, and I'm eating healthy. Look at what I'm eating, and we're just really motivated to change their health habits through the boxing, which was amazing. And I was able to sort of guide them towards that, and that was really nice. It was a really nice thing.
Our guest this morning in Lives in the Law is Vincent Shin. Vincent is the Program Manager of the Youth Law Program at West Justice. Good morning, Vincent.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Vincent, first of all, tell us, what is West Justice?
West Justice is a community legal centre. We are a not-for-profit charitable organisation, very similar to legal aid in the kind of work that we do in terms of the practice areas, but also the clients that we have. And so we're working with a lot of people that experience disadvantage and vulnerability.
And I assume, with the name West Justice, in the western suburbs of Melbourne or the western region of Victoria?
Western suburbs of Melbourne, yes. So we've got 3 offices. We've actually just moved to make things a little bit confusing. We've got 2 offices in Sunshine and 1 in Werribee.
And you're manager of the Youth Law Program. What's the Youth Law Program? What does it entail?
Sure. So in our team, it's a relatively small team. We're based in what we call the Visi Cares Hub. It's a hub, a big building in Sunshine that has a large number of organisations that work specifically with youth, young people, generally 10 to 25. So that's the same cohort that we work with in the Youth Law Program, 10 to 25. And I'm one of 2 program managers in our team. It's a relatively small team compared to the rest of the organisation. We've probably got about 9 or 10 staff. And we have a bunch of different programs, but what's unique to, I guess, our team, but also broadly West Justice, is we are a generalist legal centre as opposed to a specialist that might only do family violence, family law or tenancy. So we practice in many different practice areas. So does the youth team. So we practice in crime, family violence, personal safety, intervention orders, employment, consumer, debts, victims of crime compensation, infringements. They're just some that we practice in.
Okay, we'll get back to that in more detail later, but let's now go back to the start. You're in your late 30s now. You came to Australia with your family from South Korea when you were 1. What was it like for the family to transition from South Korean culture to Australian culture?
Yeah, so I was born in Seoul, South Korea. Came here when I was a little bit older than 1.5, and it was obviously quite an adjustment. So different. My parents and my sister, well, all of us, I didn't speak at that time, but everyone only spoke Korean. The English was quite basic. They do teach English in Korea, but it's really, my parents really struggled with English. So it was a culture shock, and I think they really found it quite challenging, and to an extent still face challenges now.
You're speaking perfect English as we speak. Most of us learnt English through our parents as we were children growing up. Where did you learn your English? Because you weren't learning it at home.
How did I learn English? It was a challenge. My parents really struggled, so we only spoke Korean all the way up until primary school. So that was kind of my first real exposure to English in primary school.
But you go to primary school in prep, not speaking English. Do you sit there and just absorb it as you go along?
I have a vague memory of just being quite shy and really uncomfortable speaking in public at school. I remember never putting my hand up to answer any questions in front of the class when I was quite young, and if I was directed by the teacher to say something, to speak a paragraph of a book or something along those lines, I was very reluctant. So it was a struggle. It was definitely a struggle, but I picked it up pretty quickly, like a lot of kids at that age.
And Vincent, your father in particular struggled with the transition from South Korea to Australia, and it may have manifested itself through family violence.
Yeah, it's a complex thing, and I reflect on it quite a lot as an older person or middle age. Oh gosh, I'm pushing on middle age, but the driver or the reasons people use violence or family violence, it's really hard to sort of pinpoint, and there's many reasons for it. And I guess that is one of the many reasons why my dad chose to use violence against us. I think there were a number of different factors, and one thing that I often think about and you hear about and talk about is the concept of intergenerational trauma. And South Korea was a very different place from 2024 looking at it now and what it was back then when my parents were there. We had a war, technically still at war, and it was a really, really harsh place to live in the 50s when my parents were born there. So we're talking post-war, a country in turmoil, and every single Korean would have experienced trauma. And then when the separation or the partition between South and North happened, the trauma that has hit the whole nation, we're talking about, at the moment in Korea, there's about 50 million people. There's a little bit more in North, but families were just ripped apart overnight and separated, and the trauma that can come from that. But obviously, post-war trauma. So my parents would have had to experience that, and that's like every Korean of that generation. But invariably, the trauma sort of sits with them, and there's science and studies and research that show and demonstrate that trauma can pass through the generations, and it's almost like a biological thing that happens, sadly. And so I'm not excusing Dad's behaviour, but that's certainly a big factor.
And with there being a significant amount of violence within the family, was it something that your schools picked up on, or neighbours did other people pick up on it and try to help in some way?
Yes and no. To the first part of the question around schools, again, when we talk about a different time, I'm 38, and back then things were looked at very differently in the context of family violence, and family violence was a private thing. It wasn't something that people spoke openly about. It was taboo. We didn't know how to respond to it, and we didn't respond to it well. And to an extent, I'm not sure if we're still responding to it well at the moment, but there were many times at school where I was questioned about some bruises, and obviously, or maybe not so obviously, I sort of made a few things up, as a lot of kids experiencing family violence do, particularly back then. And so I sort of hid a lot of it, and it was a lot of shame behind it, and I didn't have the language and the words. And as we spoke about before around language, my command of the English language was developing, and I wasn't confident speaking about everyday things, let alone family violence. So it was something that I kept to myself until later in life, quite a lot later in life. So teachers weren't really too aware of it. Neighbours, family, other people in the community, they 100% heard it. Police were at my house quite regularly, all the way through until I was sort of 17. The tricky thing with family violence when you're faced with the incident as a bystander, layperson, it's a tricky scenario to navigate. And like a lot of scenarios where it's a difficult scenario, there's the fight, fawn. And more often than not, it's the fawn. People freeze. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't want to step on any toes. And they don't know if what they're doing is the right thing. And so even me, as a person with lived experience of family violence, working in that space for many years, I still find it challenging when I'm faced with family violence. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to be a proper bystander. So I don't blame people. It's a really, really tricky scenario. And so, no, not many people intervene. Even when Dad was violent in front of family friends, it was really tricky, really, really tricky, because one aspect of our culture is we have a really, really deep ingrained respect for elders. Anyone that's 1 or 2 years older, we have a complete separate way of saying things, or a complete different language set for people older than us. My dad was a bit older than our family friends, and so that was an aspect in when you're trying to sort of intervene. And I feel like out of respect for him, the elder, they didn't really get too involved. And I have very clear memories of them just being sort of trying to intervene really gently. But it was an explosively violent man. So it was kind of hard to sort of curtail his anger, regardless of who you are.
Very difficult situation for everybody. So let's get back on track of your story. Tell us about your education. You started in primary schools in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, I think.
Yeah.
And you went to a few primary schools and a few secondary schools.
Yeah, look, again, back to the previous question around sort of did people intervene and what happened. Well, I think one reason it sort of connects to this, but I've moved around 14 times by the time I turned 18. I don't know if it's because people sort of heard there was always stuff going on, police always there, so we just moved from place to place. It was always in the southeast, and all the schools that I went to were in the southeast. So I went to 5 different schools, 2 primary schools and 3 secondary schools, all in the southeast. Yeah, it was definitely a challenge moving every few years. I hate moving, but it for whatever reason had to be done.
And how did you cope with school? Were you a good student?
Yeah, struggled, as we, again, sort of came out. Confidence was one thing, language was another, trying to process my trauma is another. So the person that I presented as a child at schools, all the different schools, was a very difficult, challenging person. Learned a lot of bad behaviours from my dad, and part of it was being very angry at everyone, angry at the world. And it was a bit of learnt behaviour from him, but also just being angry of my circumstances. Like, why me? Why is this life lottery? Why has this happened to me? Everyone else is seemingly has a nice family and things are okay. But yeah, it was... I feel sorry for my teachers. I've actually gone back to one of my schools to speak, and I kind of laugh every time when they ask me to come and present to the Year 12s as a bit of a person that to inspire. But I always make it really clear, like, you got to remember, I was a very difficult young man. I was always in trouble, suspended that many times and almost expelled that many times. Do you really want someone like me? Each time they obviously said yes. But I struggled. I actually didn't mention this earlier on, but I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. That was obviously present as a primary school student, and that obviously presents its challenges as a school student. So a combination of all the family violence, my language issues, moving around, not being stable, and then ADHD, that's a perfect recipe for a student that's going to struggle. And I did.
But you get to Year 12, you do Year 12 at De La Salle College in Malvern.
Correct.
How did that go?
Again, not great. For the social aspect, I did enjoy school. I did have some really good friends that I'm still friends with now. From that aspect, yeah, great. I loved it, but didn't learn much, didn't do much, couldn't concentrate. And the reality was, so often at home, it's not an environment conducive to study. I had always started, like not just me, all migrants start behind the 8 ball. all. When your parents don't speak English well, you don't have that as a support to help you with your homework. So not only was that somewhat of a barrier, but then the violence. It was just a horrible environment to be around, and no wonder I couldn't study if the police are over all the time and, I'm trying to just keep mum safe.
Now, everyone listening to this says, well, hang on, this guy's a qualified lawyer and he's got a responsible position. He must have done okay in school to get into law. So tell us, what was your Year 12 enter score?
So I finished Year 12 in 2003 and I didn't do too many subjects. I think I only ended up doing 4. Most people do 6. I got 24.5 for my inter score. I have to admit, I wasn't focused and I didn't really put in the effort. With that said, I knew that I had something within me that I did enjoy certain aspects of learning and educating myself. And so that was still there, simmering in the background. It took a little while to sort of kick into gear, working odd jobs here and there after I finished Year 12. I tried to go straight into TAFE and do marketing and didn't do too well. And my mental health really, really dipped quite significantly because mid-Year 12, that's when my dad left and I hadn't seen him since. So that was the last time I saw him, 17, halfway through Year 12, just before exams. And so once he left, my mental health just crashed and really struggled with motivation and zero motivation. Moved forward a few years, I ended up at art and design school. I always enjoyed drawing, sketching, and I was pretty good at it. I was okay at it. And one passion of mine is motorsports. And I love my cars. I thought, look, I really need to do something. It is like I'm in my 20s, early 20s. I'm doing absolutely nothing. And one thing, I'll sort of go backwards a little bit. One, again, a consistent migrant story is your parents, they've come here for a better life, they want you to do well. Education, education, education. That is the most important thing. Nothing else. Education. Focus on school. Lawyer, doctor, dentist. That was always sort of pushed down my throat from my mum from a very, very early age. And that definitely just sat there in the background. Yeah, so when I did art and design, I went into an art and design folio course. I wanted to be a car designer. Applied to all these different design courses and unfortunately, there's a thing called VTAC. You put in your 12 preferences in order of preference, and right at the bottom, number 12 was legal practice at Swinburne TAFE in Hawthorn.
When you say legal practice?
Legal practice.
In a business context?
Correct. So it was an advanced diploma in business and then brackets legal practice. And it was geared towards sort of paralegals and legal secretary. So I went into this application, 11 applications in art design, got 0 responses from that and got into legal practice. So went to Swinburne very, very early on in that course. I was A, very interested, and B, quite good.
Define quite good.
Very HDs all around. I was doing really, really well. I finished that whole 2-year advanced diploma with 90% average. So excelled and enjoyed it, which was the most important part of it.
It must have been really affirming to you after the background you've come from and a 24.5 Year 12 to get straight HDs all the way through a course.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said before, I knew I had it in me, and I just had to get through the trauma and get my head right. And that's when it started. And that's when I was healing and my head was in a much better place.
Interesting about the course you did at Swinburne, Vincent, and getting those remarkable results, really. One of the stories we hear regularly in talking to people is there are mentors who help them. It comes up all the time in every walk of life, be it law, be it medicine, be it business world, anything. Did you have people like that who helped you, in particularly once you started at Swinburne?
Yeah, for sure. So, like I said, when I started, I was doing well and was always engaged with the lecturers and the tutors. And there was definitely one person that stood out, and that was Alistair McCracken. Kraken, very jovial person who I connected quite well with. And throughout that 2 years, he was a lecturer for many different units that I studied. So he was a bit of a constant throughout that 2 years. And I remember having a conversation with him quite early on in that course around potentially looking into the law. And he was one of the people that suggested, explore it and look into it. And so earlier on I did, and he was definitely someone that inspired me to take everything to the next level with this sort of field of work. Another key person who sadly I've lost a bit of contact with, and I'm pretty sure he's still a magistrate, but it's Magistrate Paul Smith. The way I was connected with him was throughout my course we did placement. I chose to do placement as a registrar for 2 weeks at the Magistrates Court or Moorabbin Justice Centre. And one of the magistrates there at the time was Paul Smith. I connected instantly with him. And at that time, I had ambitions to become a lawyer, and I made that pretty clear to him. And we had so many conversations, and he was a bit of a mentor to me. I distinctly remember having many chats with him about my career, where to go, how to do things, how to apply for jobs. And he took the time, and magistrates are so busy, but he really took the time to help me out throughout that process. He wrote a character reference for me to get into law, and I feel like that was one of the big reasons I was accepted into law school, because of him. And it was just such a glowing reference. But not only that aspect, he introduced me to other people in the law, county court judge, other magistrates, and he was just, fantastic. And once I eventually got into law, I remember visiting him at all the different courts that he was in. He was in Melbourne, Frankston, Moorabbin, and so I would regularly go visit and sit in his courtroom and have a chat with him afterwards about everything that we saw, and he explained everything in very clear, obviously a lot of magistrates have a way with words, and he's no exception, and really explained things so clearly and made this mystical industry that I had no connection to much more accessible.
How wonderful to come across a person like that. Now, I think when you were doing business legal practice at Swinburne, every semester you applied to law schools across Australia.
Yeah.
Every semester.
I think it was after the first semester. So many times it was exhausting and ready to give up many times.
Because none of them replied in the affirmative.
Correct. And to be fair for them, I mean, when you've got people, ducks of each school, 99.95, and you've got many of those, and then you come across 24.5. Obviously, I chuck that straight to the side.
I thought you didn't put 24.5 in the applications. I thought you kept that out.
Yeah, so towards the end I kept it out. There's a story behind that, and I'll share that in a moment. But yeah, towards the end I thought, I need to, maybe there's a different way about this. And so, obviously I didn't get in for a couple of years. And right at the end, after the 2 years, I was almost ready to give up, and I thought, look, let's think of a different strategy. And another strategy was go to any uni degree. And I did arts at La Trobe in Bundoora. So finished my 2 years of legal practice, applied and got rejected every time. I actually didn't do great at La Trobe. The subjects that I chose, or the units that I chose, it wasn't law related. It was like English literature and politics, Australian politics. But did okay, and after one semester of completing one semester of an arts degree at La Trobe Bundoora, that was almost the end of my tether for me in terms of, I guess, giving up on this dream of being a lawyer. Like you said, I changed my strategy a little bit with the things that I wrote in my applications. One thing that I did do was not put my enter score. At that time, I was working at a clothes store in Chadstone Shopping Centre, and I got a phone call, and I knew the calls were coming around this period. So I was at work, and I told my work, look, I've got a very important phone call that I might be receiving. And I kept saying that every day to my manager. So if I just run outside, that's me getting this. And they all knew. They knew that my story and that I'd been trying for so long and working so hard and sacrificing to get into law. And then I got that phone call. I remember so clearly in the back. I remember exactly where I was standing with the phone. My friend was standing there, just bated breath, waiting for my response. And one of the first things she asked was, "We're going through your application."
This is from Victoria
University.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. So phone call from Victoria University Law School. We're looking through your application. We've noticed that you haven't put your enter score. What's your enter score? And I sort of started to say a few things, and she just sort of cut me off and said, "Look, can you just tell me your enter score?" And I said 24.5. Silence, and the literal response was, "What?" And I still remember, I laugh about it now. And I think it was quite funny, but she's probably so used to seeing 90s, and then 24.5. She was like, "What?"
Your heart must have absolutely sunk.
Yeah, it did. And I quickly just sort of said, "Look, there is a bit of a story." And in 10 seconds, I said, "Look, I experienced a lot of hardship, family violence at home. My dad left when I was halfway through year 12. There were some struggles. However, if you look at my most recent 2.5 years, I've got a 90% average, HDs all round. Please, put preference on that, and obviously take into consideration sort of background." Hung up the phone and bawled my eyes out. And I remember just crying, thinking, "That's it. I'm done. Like
my last
chance, it's gone. It's gone." Like 24.5, she sort of almost fell over and thought, "Yeah, well, what next?" And I just remember crying and being at work thinking, "God, maybe I'll just be a retail assistant for life." I don't know. But, soon after that, I got the unforgettable call saying that I was accepted, and ecstatic is an understatement, I guess.
Lives in the Law is proudly sponsored by City Maps Illustrated. Their recent publication, The Melbourne Map, is a celebration of our wonderful city. This stunning, hand-drawn illustration, which took more than 3 years to create, is available as an art print, jigsaw puzzle and calendar. The perfect acquisition for your home, office or corporate gifting.
So at age 23, you get into law at Victoria Uni. As someone with that extensive life history that you've had by the time you're 23 and very focused on getting a law degree, did you find it relatively easy studying? You might have been 4 or 5 years older than some of your peers who were coming out of school and maybe their heads were being turned pretty easily by all the bright lights of life. How was it for you coming in with a real focus?
I think it was a blessing. I think it was a blessing. And had I gone into it straight out of year 12, pretty confident I wouldn't do well. And having a little bit of life experience and maturity, I think isn't that bad, especially with a degree that's so challenging like a law degree. It was challenging, particularly the jump from TAFE to uni. It is a big jump. Luckily, that small step, there was a smaller step going into an arts degree at uni, but then into law, that was a complete different kettle of fish, and it was a challenge. It was definitely a challenge.
Having had the experience with Magistrate Paul Smith of seeing how the legal system works, or I see how part of the system works, did that help you also?
100%. Because when we study the law, it's the theory. It is so different to the real world, and having that hands-on exposure to the court environment when the law plays out, that was a whole other aspect of learning the law, and some people miss out on, and I put a big emphasis on law students that are listening now that really should really consider going to court as often as they can, because that is an environment that you can learn so much in one day that you might not be able to in months of law school. It was just a big eye-opener. And so that definitely framed a lot of my thinking early on in my law degree.
While you're studying your law degree, you start volunteering at the Footscray Community Legal Centre. At the same time, you had a job as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So you're doing your study.
2 jobs.
2 jobs. Plus, you start volunteering at the Footscray Community Legal Centre. What were you doing at Footscray?
That was probably quite early on in my degree, and because I had sort of that experience of being in court out of choice, like I actively chose to go to court and sit in my spare time. I always wanted to know what real lawyering was like. not just in court, because that's one aspect of the law. There are a lot of lawyers that don't go to court. And so I was interested in that as well. Not just that, but also Footscray Community Legal Centre. It's a community legal centre. It's working with vulnerable people experiencing disadvantage. And just because of, I guess, my experience growing up and what I had to go through, there was part of me from quite an early age that just wanted to help, because I felt I've kind of like quote unquote made it to an extent, and wanted to, I've come good. I want to help other people that have potentially experienced what I've experienced, and be a bit of that sort of role model, but also that person that helps. And so when an opportunity came up to volunteer at Footscray Community Legal Centre, it was definitely a no-brainer. And there was an application process, applied, got it, and stayed there for almost 4 years volunteering.
What were you doing?
Yeah, sorry. So there were a number of different programs. It was a relatively small legal centre at that time, but one of the core or the main programs that I was in, it was called Bring Your Bills. Now, it was an event where you brought in a whole bunch of different stakeholders, I guess, mainly focused on people who've got issues with their bills, utility bills, telco bills, all sorts of bills related and sort of, I guess, tenancy related issues. So we'd have a lawyer from our centre, would have EWOV, Electricity Water Ombudsman of Victoria, TIO, Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, and people from the actual companies, the private companies that provide the water, gas, electricity. So if there was an issue with a bill that had just blown out at no fault of their own, and the company's not resolving it, straight to EWOV. And it was just a round table. You just go to all the different places and try and resolve all your issues. There was a financial counsellor as well. And so it was a sort of like a one-stop shop sort of event where people come in and try and get all their different legal issues resolved on the one day. And so I volunteered there, and I was doing the intake. That was the main programs that I did. But throughout that time, I was actually doing other programs, one being the family violence duty lawyer program that Footscray had at the time, and we now have at Sunshine Magistrates Court and Werribee Magistrates Court, because Footscray CLC amalgamated with Wyndham Legal Service and this other legal service to become West Justice, which is where I'm at the moment. So Footscray is essentially West Justice. But when I was at Footscray, I would attend every week to the Magistrates Court when they had the Family Violence Duty Lawyer Day. So a free lawyer, the CLCs would generally represent the applicants, and Victoria Legal Aid would represent the respondents. And so I'd shadow the lawyers representing victim survivors of family violence at court. I was sort of skipping forward a little bit, but when I eventually become a qualified lawyer and admitted, I actually kept volunteering at Footscray and volunteered as a lawyer in the duty lawyer service, representing our clients at court at Sunshine and Werribee.
So you're very much in the nitty-gritty of everyday practice, helping disadvantaged people. But at some stage, you toddle off to Salzburg in Austria.
Yeah.
This sounds like The Sound of Music, Vincent.
Where it was all filmed, yes.
So how did this come about?
How did it come about? I met someone who did an exchange program sort of halfway through my law degree and just absolutely sold it to me. I'd always loved traveling and was lucky enough to travel a little bit before doing my exchange program. But in order to be accepted into this program, you had to have a distinction average and go through an application process, which I obviously went through. There was a list of different countries and cities that you could go to that Victoria University had a sort of, I guess, an arrangement or partnership with, and Salzburg was one of them. And spoke to a few friends and said, let's go. And there we were. We studied for a semester in Salzburg, Austria. The courses or the units were taken into account, and so it was like I did 4 units back in Melbourne, which is great.
Vincent, one of the jobs that you had while studying for your law degree was in residential care. What is residential care? Who's being cared for, and what are the circumstances of it, and what did you do there?
Sure. So interestingly, I heard about this from a friend, Aaron, who when I heard about it, I thought, I want to do this and I want to volunteer. So I didn't know that it was a paid gig. So I'm looking into it and I'm like, let's do this, and found out it was actually paid work, so even better. Got this job for an agency and went to all the different resi care homes. So the resi care system it falls under what we call the out-of-home care system. Within out-of-home care system, which is a child protection system, there are a few options. Foster care, kinship care. Kinship, I'll explain, it's placing a child with other family or like family friends. And then there's residential care. Resi care, as is commonly known, is scattered all across the country actually, but definitely in Victoria. All different LGAs have them, run by different organisations, and carers that work there, 24/7, a carer there, essentially step in the shoes of a bit of a parent. But we do all things that parents generally do, drive them to school if they are at school, drive them to appointments if they've got appointments, cook, clean, do all the stuff that anyone would do in a household. It is an extremely challenging environment to be in. We're talking about, in that out-of-home care system, resi is seen as essentially the last resort option and not ideal. We're placing up to 5 children highly, highly traumatised. We're talking about...
living in a freestanding home?
Yes.
House? Yes.
House, yeah. Most of them are purpose-built, so they look very, very similar. So there's an office at the end, there's a glass sort of window that you can see into the office. You've got the office desk. You've got the sleepover room because the carers sleep there. So that's another door in. But a lot of those are purpose-built to look very, very similar. The rooms, to have line of sight from the office so that you could see every single door, all the rooms are in that sort of format. So you can just take one look and see who's coming in and out of the rooms. But it's challenging when you're placing extremely traumatised kids all in the one house of all different ages with all different experiences.
What's the maximum age and the minimum age?
They don't like to put younger kids in resi, but they do. And I've cared for an 8-year-old, which is not ideal. And generally they're a little bit older, 10, 11, 12, up until 17. Most are max 5 and some is one-on-one. But like I said, they're scattered all across Victoria. All LGAs have them, and it's
clarify?
hard.
LGA is a local government association?
Local government areas.
Yeah.
So each region's got it. It's challenging for the kids mainly, and that's what I normally say, but also the carers.
Were you a person who slept over?
Yeah. Most carers had to sleep over, do sleepover shifts. Yeah, that was the sleepover shift that I didn't love.
Were you ever subject to violence within one of those houses?
I was quite lucky in that was really minimal, really minimal, but that's certainly not uncommon. And I don't necessarily blame the kids. The kids, as we've touched on previously, we're talking about the most horrific violence that they've experienced. They've learnt some horrible things, and it takes a long time to unlearn that kind of behaviour, which often for them it's instinctive and it's reactive for them. And so I don't blame them when they act out in certain ways. So I was really, really lucky that I was only assaulted once, but definitely saw it. The carers.
In being assaulted, how do you respond? I mean, were you able to stop the child who did it, or did you have to respond yourself with some violence? I mean, you don't want to, obviously.
No, of course
that's not what you want to do.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was more of a shock than anything. I wasn't injured, but in that context, I had a background in amateur boxing, and kickboxing. So I'd had 4 amateur boxing fights and 1 kickboxing fight, and so for me, I felt really comfortable in being able to defend myself and, knew how to avoid those scenarios. But if something came to it, I knew how to defend myself and get myself out of that situation. And luckily I didn't have to use that, especially in that scenario. It was just me sort of just trying to calm the young person, walk backwards and divert the anger to something different. But yeah, I was quite lucky that I had that combat sport background, which I definitely used quite a lot as a tool to build rapport with the young people. And I'd whip out my phone and show them YouTube and my fights on on YouTube. They were really interested in that, and so there were actually quite a few kids that part of the caring responsibility is that day-to-day sort of mundane stuff, but it was also I really enjoyed taking the kids to the gym, and a lot of them loved going. And once they found out that I was a boxer, Vinny, teach me boxing. So we go to the boxing gym, and there are a lot of kids that really, really enjoyed it. And sadly, a lot of these kids have extremely poor mental health and misuse alcohol and drugs. That's a sad reality. And smoking, actually. A lot of them at a very young age would smoke. And I remember this one group of kids at one house were just so excited about doing the boxing and like so dedicated, like I quit smoking, I quit everything, and I'm eating healthy, look at what I'm eating, and we're just really motivated to change their health habits through the boxing, which was amazing. And I was able to sort of guide them towards that, and that was really nice. It was a really nice thing. And because I was an agency worker, I wasn't at just one house. I went to all the different houses in the different areas, and that's particularly challenging for agency workers going to a new house. You don't know the kids, and you have to somehow build this trust when almost every single one of these kids have been failed by the system, by an adult. So no wonder they trust nobody. They trust no adult. You're going to try and be nice, and then you're going to leave. Try and be nice, leave. That is consistently the story that I hear from kids in Resi. So why am I going to take the time to get to know you? I don't care. You're probably going to be gone. But what I was able to do with that boxing was the kids kept saying, oh, get Vinny to come to the shift because I want to do the boxing. And so that was a really nice, wholesome sort of experience. Yeah.
We better get back onto the legal track, Vincent.
Oh, I guess so.
So you graduate with your LLB, and I think maybe honours in brackets after the LLB.
Yeah.
How'd you go about getting a job? I mean, you've got no background in the law apart from Alistair McCracken maybe and Magistrate Paul Smith. Getting a job's not easy.
No.
So how did you get a job?
Yeah, it took a while. It definitely took a while. So there's a few angles to this, which, it's all theory and just me hypothesising the reasons behind it. But there's one thing was Victoria University back then, new law school, one of the newest, didn't have an amazing reputation. People just didn't know it. You've got your Melbourne and Monash, and that was, you go to law schools, and VU just didn't have people in the industry. And so it was already, again, behind the eight ball for graduating out of VU, but I did have good marks. I did have the distinction. Another thing that makes me question why it took so long, and I did think about, is it my name, and the subconscious bias or views people have, am I going to have someone that might struggle with English? And if you're a lawyer, you need to have a good command of language. That's our bread and butter. And so maybe that might have been a part of it, just having a different surname. Not sure if that's so true now, but back then it took me quite a while to get a job. You hear horror stories of people taking years to finally get their job, but I did get one eventually. But throughout that time when I was admitted in April 2014 to getting that job, first job, I was still at Footscray CLC every week at court, which was obviously going to help with my application for a job as a lawyer.
And what was the job you got?
So I went into a small suburban law firm, and it was unfortunately part-time, so 3 days a week. Obviously, wanted to get a full-time gig. So it was part-time and in family law, family violence. It is what I wanted to go into with that sort of, ambition to try and help because of my background, try and get people to, try and be a bit rational in a pretty irrational practice area. There are a lot of people not being their best selves in family law. And so I did that for a little while. And at the same time, because it was only 3 days, I was still doing resi work and I was doing the painting work as well until I finally...
So you were a painter and decorator as well.
Painter and decorator, factories and residential homes. But yeah, it took a little while to finally get the full-time gig. So after May 2015, I got the full-time job as a school lawyer, which we'll obviously talk about. At that time, it was Wyndham Legal Service, and that, as I said, that amalgamated to become West Justice.
Now, Vincent, can I say I've spent the last 55 years, roughly, 55, in the law. Never heard of a school lawyer. I have heard of most things in the law, but when I read your CV, school, I thought, what is a school lawyer?
Yeah, you're not the only one, definitely not, because it said that I was the first in Australia. So
really,
it's understandable that you haven't heard of it. And when I've been doing this for 10 years now, and consistently, it's people don't know it. It's a very specific niche program. So I'll talk a little bit about it. When I first started, it was one school that I was based in, Western Suburbs, the Grange Peter 12 College and Hoppers Crossing.
Is that a part of our state education system?
State education system, correct, yeah. So prep to 12, I was based at the secondary campus, 7 to 12, within the wellbeing team. So based and physically based within the wellbeing team. So the wellbeing team is focused around, providing wellbeing support for the kids. And this was just another sort of support service that the school chose to provide for the students. And that was because we had this amazing person at the Grange who was a social worker, and her name's Renee Dowling, and she was the co-creator of the school law program. But she had a background, sort of a background in the law. She was a social worker at the OPP, working with victim survivors. And so because of that sort of exposure to the law and the legal system, knew about CLCs, community legal centres, and reached out to the local CLC, which was us, and said, look, we've got a lot of young people that have legal issues, fines, crime, employment, discrimination, all these different areas that they just don't know where to go.
And can I just clarify, these issues are independent of their parents.
Correct.
These are specific issues for the child, the student, which is not connected to their parents, and their parents can't do anything about them.
Yeah. And when we're looking at the demographic at the school, there's a lot of families out there that really struggle for many reasons. So their parents are trying to survive as well. Some of them, not all, don't want to paint with a broad brush, but a lot of them really struggling. So, it makes sense that the kids don't really have that support from family who are just trying to survive, I guess. And a lot of their issues are independent of their parents. Sometimes it's their parents that are, I guess, to use the legal term, the other party. They're the ones that are perpetrating the violence, and we need to give advice on what their options are when they're faced with family violence and their parents are the perpetrators. And so it was by and large for the kids and their own legal issues.
Is it an advice service and a referral service?
Everything.
Or might you go to court and appear on behalf of a child?
Everything, yeah. So it was advice, referral, representation. So with community legal centres, and many of your listeners might not know, CLCs do things really, really differently, where we try to avoid being transactional lawyers. We try and focus on systemic change and advocacy and fixing a system that is either broken or needs improvement. And that's our bread and butter, and that's where our focus lies. And that's not just West Justice, it's a lot of our community legal centres. So we do the transactional law stuff, but we also do the big picture systemic advocacy work. And part of our work is we if they're experiencing family violence, they want to take an IVO against their parent, their dad. Most of the time, we go to court, represent them. We take instructions from them, even if they're a child, and work with them with other support services. And back to this sort of systemic advocacy and our focus as CLCs, a bit of a mantra for not just us but other CLCs is life outcomes, not just legal outcomes. And what that means is almost always a legal issue doesn't happen in isolation. There are a number of social issues, social barriers, many social issues that need to be addressed in order to address their legal issues. And so what we do is provide that referral wraparound. So it's back and forth. So we refer to the wellbeing team, they refer to us. We find all the different organisations that work with young people.
Can I just clarify there, Vincent? So who's employing you?
West Just at the time, Wyndham Legal Service.
Back then. The legal service, not the school.
So my boss was, my employer was Wyndham Legal Service, the community legal centre. We had an arrangement, a deed with the school. The school wasn't my employer. We were just outreaching at the school. And that's the current system now. We still maintain that employment relationship, and for many legal, ethical reasons, we have to. And we just contract sort of that work out to the school. So they base out of the school.
Would it be accurate for me to envisage a parent come storming into the school and saying, you can't be taking these instructions from my child, you've got to deal with me, and I'll tell you what needs to be done with my child? Or does that happen?
Surprisingly, not that often. It definitely happened a couple of times. I distinctly remember one where it was a family violence matter. in court. And then the parent was, I shouldn't laugh, the father was not too happy. And essentially those words at school, like, why is this lawyer helping my child? He's only a child, blah, blah, blah. You need to talk to me. And, it's a bit, the whole scenario was sad, but really, really he was committing family violence, and was quite an angry person. And when you're sort of showing that to the school, everything speaks for itself. Actually, sorry, I just did want to mention one other aspect that I missed about the school lawyer program. It's the education piece. And it's a real core component in the benefits and the goals and objectives and in this program. We go into the classrooms and teach them the law, not in a legal studies context, although we do sometimes go into the legal studies classes from time to time when it fits in nicely with curriculum, but generally there are certain topics that is always an issue in schools: bullying, cyberbullying, age of consent laws, sexting, family violence, stuff to do with ticket inspectors or authorised officers, police. So what we do is we go into classes, and sometimes it's small classes, sometimes large, but we teach them about, let's say if it's bullying, what is your right, but what is your responsibility? So if this is happening to you and you're experiencing bullying, here are all the things that you can do. Here's where you can go. Here's some numbers. Here's us. We can support you through this. But then the responsibilities aspect is something that I find arguably the more important thing. And that's, if you do this, these are the consequences. This is what the law says. You decide. We can't convince you. We can't make you do certain things or not do certain things. But now you know what your responsibilities are, so you can make an informed decision on what you're going to do in that space, whether it be bullying, whether it be family violence, or whatever the context is. That's the two angles that we almost always approach legal education. We call it CLE, or community legal education. And I think that that's such a vital part in this education system. The education system is moving slightly away from numeracy literacy as the core focus, and things are definitely changing, and schools are essentially a hub where you provide not just your education, curriculum stuff, but all the other social supports and other supports that they're doing now. And the school lawyer program is just one of many.
School staff, the principal, the assistant principals, the teachers, are they comfortable having full-time lawyers in the school?
It was interesting when we first started, and there was a lot of media attention on it just purely for the fact that it was the first of its kind. It's such a unique thing. How is this two completely different sectors, the education sector and the legal sector, just come together to create this thing? And when people hear about it for the first time, it's just hard to understand and grapple with, and there are a lot of eyebrows raised, and there was a bit of nervousness around doing media because what's that going to say to the community about this school? Oh my gosh, this school needs a lawyer. And the consistent messaging, which is not incorrect, is that we're not just there for the problem stuff, the problematic things and crime. That actually wasn't the main bulk of the work. It's about just those other things to get them out of a cycle of disadvantage, debts and fines and all sorts of stuff that we address so they can focus on school. They're not as stressed about their legal issues that have popped up. Family violence, for example, if we get them certain supports, maybe an intervention order so they feel safer, all the different things, then they can focus on school. And it is a benefit to the school system because teachers are there to teach, and they can now do that if the kids are more engaged and they're not as distracted because of all these other issues. But generally speaking, when you explain everything to the staff, they get it. They really, really get it, because it's generally, we're in schools that there's a lot of challenges and a lot of teachers with good intentions, and they're there for a reason, working with kids that experience disadvantage. And so they get it.
This started 10 years ago, you said?
2015, yeah.
2015. Has the idea taken on elsewhere?
Yeah. So we are now in 4 schools.
We being the West Justice program.
West Justice program, where it all started. We're at 4 schools, two government schools, 1 flexi school. It has now gone all across the country. We have a national group called the School Lawyer Reference Group, where all the states and territories running a similar model, lawyers in school or school lawyer program. We catch up quarterly and just, it's essentially like a community of practice where we workshop things and assist each other. And it's for new community legal centres or legal aid bodies that want to start this program. We help them set it up and explain the model. And because it's tried and tested for so long from our perspective, we know what works and we know what doesn't, and we can, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They don't need to try and navigate those real tricky scenarios because we've done it all and set out those foundations. It's interestingly, we had someone from London contact me because they had a similar. They saw, I think it was the Australian Story that I was in, and they were initially Melbourne based, but have lived London for a long time as a lawyer there, and so she reached out just trying to understand our model and implement certain things that we've learnt in her program where they're in school. So it's gone Australia-wide. Most states and territories have them, and even to London, they sort of already had their model, I guess. But yeah, so it's a model that's taken off, and it's essentially my baby, and I love it. And I think that I love the model, and I say this all day, every day. I wish I had a lawyer at my schools. I really wish I did, and I always refer back to that just in my mind, like just remember where it all came from and what this program is trying to achieve.
I can see why you love it, Vincent. It sounds wonderful to me and quite remarkable that, and so good. It says good things about the law that, as well as being here in high-rise buildings in the city and going to work every day in a suit, etc., that we are reaching out and doing things like this, as I say, the legal profession, to people who need it. It's a fantastic program.
Yeah.
Just wonderful.
Thank you.
William and Lonsdale is brought to you by Green's List, one of the leading multidisciplinary barristers lists in Australia. Green's List believe in promoting conversation around the ideas and issues that shape not only our legal system, but our wider community.
So in 2020, you switched to your current role, which we mentioned at the start of the podcast, Manager of Youth Justice Program at West Justice. So what's under your umbrella there now? As well as school lawyers, what else do you do?
Yeah, so one of the program managers in the youth law program. There's two main programs. We've actually got quite a few different programs, and like I said, there's another program manager that manages a few different. There's three program managers, and they all run different programs. So the two that I manage is the school law program, and this one that. This is the worst name. Out of Home Care Legal Clinic. Out of Home Care Legal Clinic. I need to think of a better name, more punchy name, but that's what it is.
Because I don't really understand what it does based on that name.
Yeah, exactly, and neither do I. But it is based on the work that I did in Resi Care, in the out-of-home care system, because I saw, and when I was a Resi carer, I was a law student, so everything that I did and looked at was through a lawyer's lens or a legal lens, and I saw so many of these kids with legal issues that are just simply not being addressed. No one knows where to refer them, and these kids don't trust people, even professionals. If they've been removed by police, removed by child protection, the government, and then placed in a horrible environment, no wonder they don't trust people. And so they don't address their legal issues. It just sits there. And so because of that and what I saw when I started, I guess, not being as hands-on with the school lawyer program and stepping out of the schools, I brought to my organisation at that time, now West Justice, this program, Out of Home Care Legal Clinic, focusing on residential care for kids in Resi. We partnered with an organisation, Anglicare Victoria. We go out to 8 of their Resi care homes in the western suburbs. Very similar model to school lawyer, where it's we go to them, not expect them to come to us. That makes sense for kids. So we go out to their Resi homes, and we've been there for quite some time now, and offer the same suite of legal services we do in the school lawyer program. So all the same practice areas, all the same advocacy, court, education slightly different because it's smaller cohorts and kids that find it really hard to sort of sit still and stay focused and often not home. So the education piece looks very, very different, and it's short, sharp, impromptu kind of informal education stuff, which they definitely need. And so like I said, it's very, very similar to school lawyer model, the same practice areas, slightly more need, really, really complex, really, really complex.
Are the children in resi care confident in coming forward and telling you about their issues so that you can then assist them?
Yes and no. Some are, some aren't. Some are really, really closed off. Some are very happy to just share absolutely everything. Because the reality is with resi, the sad reality is there is a case file of that young person's story from birth, and it's horrible. And most new workers, they go in, read the story. What's their trauma, what's their background, and what led them to be removed by child protection. And we know their whole life story, and the kids know that. And so a lot of them is like, you already know everything, I'll just tell you everything anyway. All my messed up trauma, I'm just going to share with you because you probably already read my file. So we've got some that are like that, really open. Some are really, really closed. But I think I can confidently say that we've built enough rapport, we're consistent and regular enough to have that trust from the kids, and we see quite a few legal issues pop up and they confide in us, which is really nice.
And so, Vincent, with the out-of-home care program, do you sometimes go to court and appear on behalf of the children?
Yeah, for sure.
And you also refer them on to maybe other services, legal services or whatever?
Yeah. So if there's a practice area that we don't practice in, we definitely refer out. We've got a huge network of people we refer to, so we know what's out there and refer appropriately, but we try and keep the ones that we can representing.
Now, moving on to right now, I think this year basically, you're on a body called Lived Experience Advisory Council.
Yeah.
What is that?
So in January of this year, 2024, I was appointed to be on the Lived Experience Advisory Council, and that falls within the Domestic Family Sexual Violence Commission. It is a commission set up to monitor the 10-year plan to end violence against women and children.
Who set up the commission, Vincent? Commonwealth Government, state government?
Commonwealth Government, Department of Social Services.
Of the Commonwealth Government.
Of the Commonwealth.
So this is a Commonwealth. This is an Australia-wide body, or the council, the Lived Experience Advisory Council.
So 12 members. We were selected from a very large group, so I feel very honoured and privileged to be part of it. And each state and territory has a representative, and everyone has a lived experience of family, domestic or sexual violence.
And so the bodies come to you and advocate to you, and you then produce a report for the minister or something like that?
Yeah, it's essentially that. That's one component of it. The bodies that come to us is sort of ad hoc. It's not a consistent. It is consistent, but it's not set, and it is ad hoc in nature. And these days, I'm finding not just government bodies, but many organisations, they really are making a genuine attempt at doing this lived experience work properly. And that is, we are experts. We've lived through family violence. We've lived through the system. We know what works and what doesn't because of our personal experience. And that is gaining momentum in all aspects of life, and government is no exception. And so what we do is we use our lived experience of the system and what we know, and most people on that body also live and breathe it as their work. And so it is the lived experience of our stories, but also the stories of the people that we work with, to talk about this big, ambitious plan to end violence against women and children across Australia. And it's about making sure that we're ticking off all the objectives and we're just providing feedback on what we think should happen. Because as you might know, and your listeners might know, when you've got government agencies creating laws and policies that may not have that lived experience voice, they're so detached on what happens on the ground that you know, in theory, in policy, when it's written up, it might sound like it will work well, but really it doesn't sometimes. And that's where the value of a lived experience body comes in and highlights the shortcomings of a system, or makes recommendations on what can improve.
Vincent, normally at this stage of the podcast, I ask somebody to reflect on their life in the law and what they might distill out of it and what advice they may give. You've had a remarkable life in the law, a remarkable life, full stop. But at 38, I don't want you to reflect on your life. I want you to look into the crystal ball, because I'm interested to see now someone with all of this experience you've got, which is so valuable to our community. where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years' time? To continue to do this work, do you run the risk of burnout? What might you go into politics to try to create change? Might you come to the bar and be a barrister and use your legal experience that way? Might you go to the UN and work at an international level? Have you thought ahead like that, or do you just take it day by day?
From time to time, I think about it, and I can't narrow exactly what I want to do. However, I know that there is just this innate thing in me where I need to be in a role that's for purpose. I contemplated what is the meaning of life. Why have I gone through all this hardship and all of that? And one thing that after reflecting is I need to use my experience, my voice to make change. And as sort of trite and a bit like, yeah, it's as trite as it sounds, I genuinely need to be in a role where I can make change and help. And that, I think, is why all this happened to me, why I was put on this earth, is to make that change. So whatever it is, I want to be in a role where I can make that change, whether it be one organisation that I've always respected and thought about is the Commission for Children and Young People, whether it's the state body or the national body. But children and young people is my focus just because of my experience. That's where my passion is and that's where my skills are. And so maybe somewhere in the Commission, somewhere in a government department, making changes in family violence. Family violence is something that I'm extremely passionate about, obviously to prevent and make change around that. But family violence, maybe a family violence organisation helping people that are victim survivors. Maybe overseas. Yeah, look, it's I can't narrow it, but I need to be in something where I'm helping people either in family violence or children.
And history probably says if you do a good job like you've been doing so far on a daily basis, things will occur where those opportunities are offered to you. Vincent, thank you for coming in today and telling us what has been a so far remarkable and quite inspiring life in the law.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Show notes from today's episode can be found at greenslist.com.au/podcast. There you'll find useful links, a transcript of the show and some excellent photos of our guests, as well as a link to the wonderful episode of Australian Story about Vinny and his life. If you're enjoying Lives in the Law, please tell your networks, subscribe, rate and review the show. Your host is former lawyer and Greens List clerk Michael Green. Our show is produced and edited by me, Catherine Green, mixed and mastered by Windmill Audio, and recorded by Alex McFarlane, who also wrote and performed all the music for the series. We're coming to you from the iconic Owen Dixon Chambers on the corner of William and Lonsdale Streets in our beautiful city of Melbourne. We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respect to their elders past and present. There is no doubt that conversations about justice have been taking place on this land for thousands of years, and we are privileged to continue that discussion here today.